Stockholm, Sweden is an amazing place. The country of Sweden is just fantastic. Not a day goes by that I don't think about the beautiful landscape, the wonderful people there, and even the church members that I grew to know and love. I served in a couple of different, you could say, groups in Sweden, like a couple of different cultures that exist in Sweden. I served in wards as well as small branches. My first area was one of the larger wards in Stockholm. It's pretty close to the temple in an area called Handen. And it's a wonderful place, a large ward, wonderful members, super willing to help. And the bishop was just a superstar for us. We had this investigator that lived what we thought was close to his house. It turns out it was his brother's house that he lived close to. But the bishop comes in on his bike one night after we had called him earlier that day and comes there just because we asked him to and says hi to this investigator that had told us that he thought he had met our bishop. It turns out he met a completely different guy, and the bishop had no clue who this guy was. But the bishop comes down there, invites him over for dinner, says hi, invites him to church, and bears a solid testimony to this investigator that we had. And it was very powerful. And I was very grateful for the willingness of the members to help in that area and for their support. The next area I got sent to was very different from that. It was a little branch with maybe 20 to 25 active members. Not a whole lot of people were in church. We had basically a little office space was our church. And the work there was very different. The members weren't as helpful because obviously in a small branch you don't have as many resources. You don't have as many people, so it's hard for the small amount of people to try to do as much work as a larger ward. But the thing that really impressed me with that area is the strength of the members in Sweden. Sweden is not in a nice place religiously. They do have a state religion, which is Lutheranism, but it's not really that actively practiced. Sweden's one of the most atheistic countries in the world right now. Very secular. A lot of people are members in the church, like not our church, but the Swedish church, purely out of tradition. They don't actually believe in the stuff that they learn about in the Bible, or if they do, believe it as a symbolic story most often. The Swedish church changes a lot in its values because it's controlled by politics, not by a church board like most other churches are. And as a result of this constant change, it's hard to keep things under control, and it's hard for things to stay well regulated and for a religion to actually prosper. And because of past experiences that have happened in Sweden with religion and forced religion, a lot of Swedish people tend to not like organized religion. They are religious. They do have a belief in something, but they don't like talking about it. It's something that's very personal to them. And as soon as they start using words that other religions use to describe what they believe in, they just don't want to use those. Because as they use those words, they think that we associate it with our beliefs. And they don't want to say that they believe what we believe, because they believe something that's unique to them usually. And so oftentimes, using words like God isn't going to be the best way to describe what they believe in, even if it is the same thing. We remember when Ammon was teaching King Lamoni, how he said, "Do you believe in a God?" And King Lamoni says, "I don't know what that means." And so Ammon replies, "Do you believe in a great spirit?" And that was a term that was familiar to King Lamoni. However, a higher power might not even be the right word to describe things for a Swedish person who has a belief. It's not that they aren't believing in anything. They have a belief in something, they just don't know how to describe that with our jargon, the religious jargon that's common. The climate is pretty interesting in Sweden. So most of the year, Sweden is very cold, very harsh climate. It's very dark. The other half of the year, it's very light and it's a paradise, except that it rains a lot. I'm not a big fan of the rain, but other people might be, and that's good because Sweden is a very wet country, very green. Specifically, when I was serving up north in the winter, I was in a city called Sundsvall. It was very cold. It would get down to negative 18 Celsius and lower. It got down below negative 20 Celsius, which is below 0 Fahrenheit. So that's just the raw temperature as well. It got really cold and it's dark. And then we were also by the ocean, so it's also very humid. We'd have 100% humidity most of the days during the winter. And then you also have to factor in wind chill. And so my advice for that is just to layer up, because there's not much else you can do about that. It is really cold, but I really like the cold. I thought it was fun. Plus, it makes for those epic stories where you're walking out and you're knocking on doors, and it was negative 30 degrees and you're super cold and you didn't want to be there, but you did it anyway. And you knocked on that one door and you found that one family, and it was all worth it. And those stories really do happen. That's the wonderful thing about it. I remember specifically one time we were walking around, it was negative 26 Celsius and 100% humidity with quite a bit of wind that day. And we went and were knocking these houses, and we were talking about obedience and the role of obedience in missionary work. And then we started talking about opening your mouth and talking to everyone you see. And so we started doing that more and more, especially on buses. It's hard because Swedish people usually don't speak to each other on buses. But as we started speaking to people on buses, we saw a lot more interested people in our paths, which was really cool. And then we came and were knocking on some more doors, and the most incredible thing happened. First door we knock on in this specific neighborhood, was a family who was interested in learning more about the gospel. Next door we knock on, no one was home. The next door, another person who's interested in hearing more. And we even pulled out our device and showed them a little video on it about Jesus Christ and about Christmas. We were able to share that with them and gave them a Book of Mormon and were invited back. We go to the next door, knock on it. They were busy eating dinner, and they said to come back another night because they'd love to hear what we have to say. And we left them with a little pamphlet. We go to the next door, knock on the door. They're also interested, and we shared the story about the Book of Mormon, and they really loved that. This is a single mom, and she had 3 daughters, and they're all pretty young. And I remember going back there multiple times teaching her, and it was just a wonderful experience. So the stories about bad weather and things like that really do lead to good things, even though the climate can be hard. And during the summer, it's absolutely beautiful. You're so high up in latitude that during the summer, it never gets dark. You will see light out the entire time. In the winter, vitamin D is your friend, though, because sun gives you vitamin D, and when you aren't exposed to as much sunlight like you are in the winter, vitamin D really helps. Our apartments were really nice in Sweden, for the most part. Some were not so nice, but for the most part, they were really wonderful. I remember one of my apartments, we had heated floors, we had a dishwasher, you could sign up for laundry in the basement of that apartment. It was a pretty large apartment. We each had our own desks, a couch, a nice kitchen, really nice kitchen, and I put that to good use with my cooking. Just a lot of the apartments are really nice. And for those of you who haven't lived in an apartment before, wait till you live in another apartment, then you'll realize how nice they actually are. A lot of people in Sweden, in fact, I would say 90% of the people in Sweden who actually make money. Let me back up and fix what I just said. In Sweden, a majority of families have both parents working. Both the mom and the dad work, which means the kids are put in a little place called dagis, which is like daycare. And so the kids go to daycare for the day, or they're at school, and they'll have their after-school free time activity thing. But both parents are working, so it's hard to find people during the day at home in Sweden. So the best time to do those kind of activities, like knocking on doors, is in the evenings when people will actually be home with their families. However, since people are out and about during the day, it's a very good time to be out and about talking to people on the streets. Swedes have a high standard of living, They aren't struggling to get by with money. They really do have a lot of money, and you'll see that a lot in Sweden. It's a really good economy as far as the standard of living compared to the economy. There's a lot of jobs in technology. That's probably the thing I saw the most, with people working with computers, with videos, with music, specifically within technology spheres of those different spheres. There's a lot of music that actually comes from Sweden, a surprising amount that people probably don't know about. An easy one that people probably do know about, those Swedish House Mafia, ABBA, but there's a lot more of music that we don't know as much about that's actually from Sweden. And that's an interesting thing as well. A lot of people in Utah have ancestors that come from Sweden. Way back in the early days of the church, one of the first European missions to open up was the Scandinavia mission. And as missionaries were sent to Sweden, it was actually illegal to preach the gospel there at the time because there was an enforced religion by the state, and how they had the laws set up for taxing and different things. You had to go to the state church every week. You weren't allowed to preach religion outside of that or have religious assemblies outside of those constituted by the Church of Sweden. And so when you had John Forsgren, the first missionary in Sweden, trying to preach the gospel, it didn't really go so well, and he made many prophecies about the city of Gävle, which were fulfilled in short years after he was there. And I actually got the privilege of serving in that city, which was really cool, where the church started in Sweden, and there's a lot of great things happening there now. But he was thrown out of Sweden, deported, even though he was a citizen of Sweden. But he was lucky that he just wasn't killed, because that was the punishment for organizing religion, basically, in Sweden.